to be either classified within existing categories or prompting a redefinition of a category or leading to a new category. The first example I got only yesterday from Philippe Laluc, who did his PhD on an electric car. And the electric car nowadays is very much like any other car. Okay, so it is used in the same way and for the same purposes, and it also looks the same as cars. But obviously, you have to charge it in a different way, and the range you can cover is slightly lower than in gasoline cars. So the trajectory that the electric car took in the end was of a breakthrough innovation. That is, by building a better car in terms of lower pollution, and later on, of course, CO2 emissions became an issue as well. But in all other respects, user practices, how it's being sold, the service characteristics attached to it, it's the same as any other car. However, when it was launched in California, which was most progressive in the 70s, and also in the Netherlands and France, there were initial attempts to develop an electric car. It was actually meant as a city car, as a small car that would not adhere to all the standard requirements of a car in terms of size or safety and speed, but could be used as a city car to cover small distances, because the main problem was pollution in urban areas. And what is nicely shown is that industry leaders and also some members of the public didn't consider that true cars. And in the end, this process was halted, and the trajectory that was taken in the US and elsewhere was just to create electric cars as substitutes of existing gasoline cars, to be used for the same purposes, same distances, same speeds, etc. Uber is a case that I studied myself. And Uber is interesting because Clayton Christensen got into a debate whether Uber was a disruptive innovation or not. While at the time, everyone talked about Uber as the example of a disruptive innovation because it disrupted the taxi industry. What Christensen said, no, it's not a disruptive innovation because in his eyes, Uber was superior to existing taxi services from day one. So it didn't target the low end, it was simply a better alternative. However, in my definition, it is a disruptive innovation because Uber took away a standard requirement that we perceive as part of the taxi category, and that was the requirement that the driver had a taxi license and went through security checks, and the car went through security checks and so forth. By taking away the requirement that drivers should have a license, Uber was disrupting the category of taxi because it was offering a taxi service without this particular requirement that we associate as a normal taxi service. Now, interestingly, while it started off as a disruptive innovation, it ended up as a different kind of innovation, depending on the geography where you use. Here, geography comes in. In the US, the lobby of Lyft and Uber was so effective that they created a new legal category for Uber and Lyft. They called it network transportation companies. So they managed to get their own regulations, very loose ones, by convincing regulators that they were not taxi companies and that their service was not a taxi service, but that they were a technology company providing an app for anyone just to drive around people without a license. So there it became a new category, at least in a legal sense, but yeah, maybe also in in a popular sense, in that in the US people talk about taking an Uber. In Europe, you may know that Uber changed its strategy after a lot of law cases. And now they only operate according to what they call license-based only model. So if you now take an Uber in Europe, exceptions aside, the driver will have a taxi license. Okay? And it will operate under those same regulations as any other taxi. So there it became a breakthrough innovation in the sense that it was institutionalized in the existing category of taxis and regulations applied. Now there are other court cases that have to do with the labor rights of drivers, but that's another story for another time. And finally, we have the category of meat substitutes. That is your vegetarian hamburger, but also insect food, which interestingly is not seen as meat, but as a meat substitute, and all kinds of other plant-based products that want to substitute meat. And this is a very interesting new category because it distances itself from a very well-known existing category, but it doesn't define what it is. It only defines what it is not. But by defining it as a substitute, it clearly appeals to the characteristics of meat. It can be in size, in color, in taste, in texture, in packaging, and that's also how these products are being marketed. So you could say they are creating a new category for themselves to distance themselves from an existing category, while still, at least discursively, referring to an existing category. And this is now creating, again, legal and political issues, because the question now is on the table, are these producers allowed to use wording where words related to meat are being used? So maybe we can't buy vegetarian hamburgers anymore, but something else that is still the same thing, because the hamburger apparently is too much associated with meat, and it would be misleading for consumers. Well, this has not been settled yet, so the meat substitute story is something that's still ongoing. So let me finish by why I think this framework can be useful for at least some of us who study innovation. Well, first of all, I think we need more definitional clarity about innovation. And of course, there can be other definitions out there, but the nice thing of this scheme is that they all are derived from the same theoretical framework, a framework that is not just coming from innovation studies, but actually has a much longer history in very well established disciplines like philosophy and psychology, and also in marketing, where people for decades have studied categories and how we use and cannot do without categories to make sense of the world, to regulate what we do, and so forth. So it also provides us with an interface, a resource, if you like, to build upon all that knowledge already accumulated in those other disciplines. Third thing is the generic notion of innovation. So it applies to manufacturing, services, cultural, social innovation. And the reason I think that is important is because what I've seen over the last decade happening is that people do study service innovation, they do study cultural innovation, they do study social innovation, but the theorizing in those fields is very much about how does this type of innovation differs from technological innovation. As if there is some kind of true innovation, and then we have to theorize about what other forms of innovations are out there. So you get this kind of plethora of theorizing that only makes the connections looser between these subcommunities rather than people talking to each other. So I hope this will also bring service innovation, social innovation back into mainstream innovation discourse. And it also doesn't say anything about firms or markets. Of course, markets are organized by market categories, but also spaces of diffusion outside markets are organized by categories. Yeah. There's nothing intrinsic in this theory that it would only apply to market diffusion. So the extensions I hope to see and contribute to is first of all an empirical program. If we are able to classify innovations in these four categories of incremental, breakthrough, disruptive, and radical, we can start testing much more systematically the theories that have been developed, for example, about disruptive innovation, or about incremental and radical innovation. And one way to do that is not to go back to patent data, because they are obviously very specific, but to go to text, full text, for example, from trade journals or popular media, and see how innovations are being described. And then with AI, we can subtract that information in an automated way and try to classify all these innovations that have been described in journals or online in a systematic way. And there are some attempts to use AI to build these what's called literature-based innovation outputs indicators that people before did manually, but now we can do with AI. We can think about strategy. What actor strategies can we observe with different types of innovations? This is what strategy people do. So they look at how institutional entrepreneurs, as they call it, try to frame a new innovation as being part of an existing category or very different from an existing category, and by doing so try to influence the social acceptance of their innovation. So we can go down to the actor level. So today I just looked at the category level, more the structural level, but you can go down to the actor level. Thirdly, we could think about studying the entire diffusion of innovations or transitions as a sequence of different types of innovations. Okay, and this would be a way for sustainability scholars to look at innovation category. We can look at geography of innovation, not just by looking at how the same innovation gets institutionalized in different ways in different geographies, like with Uber, but also by taking into account that the institutional structure in terms of already existing categories may differ across geographies as well. Okay, so the starting point may be different, and then innovators may take the innovation from one geography to the other if they find out it's hard to institutionalize in one place, that they can try it in another place. And finally, regulation works with categories. They have to, because before you can apply regulation, you have to be able to assign a product to a category, otherwise you don't know what regulation applies. And there are all forms of adaptive regulation now being tried out to be less strict in the very beginning of an innovation process about requirements, but rather also think about redefining a category to allow more innovations to become part of it, or as a last resort, to create a new category to be able to institutionalize a new innovation. So I want to leave it at this. I have some backup slides if needed, but I hope this is helpful and may bring economics and sociology closer together in the study of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have time for a couple of questions, depending on the leader. Sorry,
Daniel Archibugi again. 30 years ago, we had this problem of measuring innovation, and at a certain point, on the Sistema non dismonti and Paris, the OECD, which developed the Frascati manual for R&D measurement, developed another manual for innovation measurement, the famous Oslo manual. Not only that, but we convinced Eurostat to carry out the community innovation survey. And I think now they have done it for 10 years. We have done it in other countries, in Latin America, in Japan.